While waiting for other delegates from other halls, just to inform you that at the MIA booth, you can actually get a free copy of the latest technical publications written by our own MIA's own technical managers. We have 4 topics there. Among others are tax treatment on Islamic finance, understanding audit engagements undertaken by practitioners, and an annual report which is issued by the 2 governing bodies for the accountants, which are the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board as well as the Ethics Standards Board. It's free, so go ahead and take it. And maybe you would like to have a look at the few books which are sold at the MIA booth. It's at 10% discount, so please do take opportunity of that discount. Thank you. For those who just joined us from other tracks, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome. Before we begin, please remember to set our mobile phones in silent mode or turn it off immediately. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall commence with concurrent session 2 of track C with a talk titled Managing Difficult People. I believe the title of this session speaks for itself, and I so believe many of us have been waiting for this session. However, please allow me the honor of introducing the speaker of this session. The speaker is a very accomplished person, having 25 years experience as a corporate trainer and 15 years experience as a professional speaker, including as a conference speaker, workshop leader, facilitator, and MC. Kevin Ryan has co-authored 9 books and also contributes in regular columns and on communication skills. He is passionate in assisting underperforming salespersons lift their performance, and even one organization testified that Kevin's guidance has been a major factor in them winning projects worth $15 million in just 3 months. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kevin Ryan.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. Please move down, come in. I am actually going to give out rewards to those who sit in the front row. I can't throw the rewards any further than the front row, but if you happen to be sitting in the front row, you might just get lucky. Congratulations, look at this. Yes, you see, rewards for the front row. Message number 1 in handling difficult people: tempt them. Give them rewards for doing things that they otherwise wouldn't do. Let other people see that those who are doing the difficult things are getting rewards, and then they'll be drawn to the front, won't they? They won't be able to resist. Is there anybody here in the front row who hasn't got a chocolate yet? Yes? Is there anybody sitting down the back who'd like a chocolate? You know what you have to do to get one. Relatively easy. You don't have to sit in the front row for any other session for the entire conference. But everyone else will see you. They will see you as a proactive person. They'll admire you. They will see you as a leader. Let me start with a question. Who came into this session because they believe that in these modern times, people are becoming more difficult to deal with? Please put your hand up. Let me ask you another question. Who believes that there are more difficult people to deal with in the accountancy profession than in any other profession? And just to give you all a chance to vote, who came into the session simply because all the other sessions were full? Let's try and make it worthwhile. We all have difficult people in our lives, don't we? I'd like you to think just for a moment, not too long, but just for a moment, about who the difficult people are in your life at the moment. Because they're the people I'm going to get you to think about as we talk about how we might be able to deal with those people for the next 60 minutes or so. Who are the difficult people in your life? Think about who they are. Turn to the person next to you and say, I hope it's not you. turn to the person on the other side and say, I hope it's not you either. Because in my experience, I've found that there are actually only two really difficult people in the world, but they do get around a lot. And so what we need to do is find out how we can be smarter in the way that we actually deal with people. And I'd like to talk about three kinds of smarts this afternoon. The first smart I'd like to talk about is being people smart. How can we be smarter in the way that we understand others? How can we be smarter in the way that we actually deal with them? Then we'd also like to think about how we can be process smart. I'll talk about that. How we can understand the process of that interaction and how we might be able to be smarter about the way that we deal with that. And then the final one is how can we become self-smart? How can we become a little bit smarter about the way that we understand ourselves? Message number one. And I got this message from two great gentlemen, one by the name of Roger Fisher, who unfortunately died only 3 months ago, and the other one by the name of William Ury. These are two gentlemen who wrote a book called Getting to Yes back in 1980, the leading textbook on the skill of negotiation. But it's not just about negotiation, it's about how we can interact more effectively with other human beings. And one of the principles of Getting to Yes was we need to separate the people from the problem. Can we separate out the people and the problem and see whether it's the person who's the problem or maybe just the position that they're in? Because sometimes we look at the problem and there's you and there's them and you're getting an unhappy outcome. But what if you were to recognise the fact that maybe if you were dealing with somebody else, it could be a happier outcome? Is the problem with the person or is it simply with the position that they're in? But then it also could be a situation of if that other person was dealing with somebody other than you, then maybe there would be a happier outcome as well. So is it a problem with the person or is it a problem tied up with the actual position that they're in? You see, I can remember when I was the business development manager of a very large company, and I constantly found that I was having problems with the CFO, the finance manager. And I realised, or I believed for a long time, that problem was mostly caused by the fact that we had interpersonal problems. He simply didn't understand me and I didn't understand him. And then all of a sudden there was another person that took over that role. And guess what? I had exactly the same problem. And I realised it wasn't the person at all, it was just the position. I was wanting to spend money, they didn't want to spend it. It was quite straightforward. And once I was able to recognise that, then there was a way forward. Because I realised that we both wanted to grow the business, I simply had to go back and find the common ground, find where there was overlap. Because what we were doing, we were focusing on the areas where there wasn't overlap, where we disagreed. But there were areas where we agreed, and we needed to step back a little bit to be able to look at where was that overlap. We can't move forward if there's not an overlap. And once we recognise there's an overlap, it's not two people sitting on either side of the table arguing, it's two people sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the problem, saying, how can we solve this problem together? We need to be shoulder to shoulder with somebody else if we're ever going to solve the problem. We don't need to be sitting around looking across the table from them, putting ourselves into an adversarial position. We need to be able to identify the common ground. One of the main factors which is going to give us a better relationship in today's environment is to be able to grow trust. Ever since the global financial crisis, trust has been front of mind for people. People's trust has been fractured. Trust has always been important in a relationship, but the global financial crisis made trust front of mind. And one thing that we have identified is that trust grows in common ground. It is not logical, it is human nature. If you have more common ground with someone, you are more likely to trust them. About 5 years ago, they did a survey of prisoners having come out of a prison, I'm not going to mention which country, after having served a long-term prison sentence. They were asked the question, who on the face of this planet do you trust most at this point in time? Guess who most of them said? Was it their family? Was it their community liaison officer? Was it the people who were going to help them to reintegrate into the community? No. Most of them said, the person I trust most at the moment is a fellow prisoner. Now that's logical, isn't it? As I said, it's not logical, but it's human nature. The fact that you have more common ground with someone means that you're more likely to trust them. I heard of a large project which was awarded in a very, very large city. Might be this one, might be one very, very close to here. And it was awarded simply because the CEO, when he was trying to analyse three tenders, which he saw as being perfectly equal with each other, recognised that one of the tenders lived in the same apartment building as he did. And they won the project. Illogical? Yes. But did it win the business? Yes, it did. How much common ground have you been able to identify? How much common ground have you got with the people that you deal with? I don't have time to do it here because it's part of my 2-day workshop, but in the 2-day workshop we actually have a model known as the connection wheel, and it's actually a model which allows people to identify 4 different ways in which they can connect. We connect at the circumstantial level. We happen to have the same life circumstances. We connect at the idiosyncratic level. We make the same choices. We like the same style of music. We laugh at the same humour. We watch the same movies. And in the years that I've been using that tool, whenever I've gone into offices to be able to deal with people, sometimes people who've been working with each other for 5 or 10 years, and we put them through that exercise, they have found out things about each other that they have never known before. Points in common. They've lived in the same place. They enjoy the same sport. They enjoy the same music. They've worked at workstations side by side with each other for 5 years and never had that conversation. How can you have the conversations with somebody else which is going to allow you to be able to identify the common ground, to be able to get to know them better? Because the better you know them, the more likely you are to find that common ground. The more that I see you as being like me, the more I'm likely to trust you. Robert Cialdini, the leading thinker in the world on the powers of influence and persuasion, has nominated one of the main influences is liking and similarity. In other words, if I see you as being like me, I see you being as similar to me, then I'm more likely to listen to you. I'm more likely to believe that you can empathise with me. I'm more likely to think that you understand me. How can you get to know them better? Here's a wonderful saying I heard many years ago. It was a challenge for me, but I'm going to challenge you with it. If you don't like someone and you find them boring, it's probably because you simply don't know them well enough. If you find someone boring, it's simply because you don't know them well enough. How can you find out more? How can you be able to move forward? You see, the challenge is when somebody doesn't like us or somebody disagrees with us, we make some silly assumptions. Here's the first assumption that we make. If you disagree with me, then my first assumption is going to be that you are ignorant. Can everyone read that? I just assume that you're ignorant. You don't have the same information as I do. Because if you had the same information as I do, you would have the same opinion as I do. Then, if I become aware of the fact that you are not ignorant, that you have the same information as I have, and you've come to a different conclusion, then my assumption is that you're stupid. Got the same information, come to a different conclusion, must be a problem with your intelligence. Then, if I become aware of the fact that you have the same amount of information as I do, and, scary as it may seem, you're actually as smart as I am, then the final assumption I'll make is that you're evil. Human nature. Don't fall into that trap. It is perfectly okay for people to have the same information as you, to come to a different opinion, and to be just as good as you. In fact, you need those people in your life. You need that perspective to be able to allow you to be able to see what you can't see. To be able to grow yourself, to be able to become more aware of how you can move forward. And how can you have that shared experience? About 7 years ago. Not that long ago, but it still sticks in my memory. I was asked by this very good client of mine to organise a session, a one-day session for their staff, and he wanted some outdoor experiential activities. Now, I don't do outdoor experiential activities. My insurance doesn't cover it. I'm certainly not capable enough to save people when they get themselves into dangerous situations. And so what I did was I went out and I identified a company that did what he wanted to do, because he wanted his staff to go canoeing. And so I identified this company that specialised in corporate canoeing adventures, and we put them out, and they went onto a river not far from where his offices were, and they went out there in little canoes. And what was happening was they were asked to choose a number, and by this number it would determine by a perfectly random process who would actually be the pairs in the canoe. By sheer coincidence, two ladies who happened to pull out those numbers and in the same canoe were two ladies who had worked side by side for about 3 years and hated each other. I didn't know this. The manager knew this, and he looked back and just kept his mouth shut, and later on he said to me, I just thought this would be interesting to see what happened. Not only did they not like each other, they were very, very bad canoeists. So we were all watching them as they hopped in their canoe, managed to keep it upright, got just out far enough into the water to be above head height in the depth of the water, and you can imagine what happened. The canoe went over, both of them ended up in the water. Now, they had life jackets on, so their life wasn't threatened. The rescue services of this organisation that I'd hired were very, very impressive, and they had people there within seconds to be able to get them there and to get them back. Here was the really important message that I learned from that, though, because when I was talking to him the next day and asking him how everything went, and more importantly, how those two had gone, he said, "It's remarkable. They are now the best of friends." Simply having that shared experience, dare I say it, a shared terrifying experience, had actually caused them to recognise the fact that they had more in common than they had as points of difference. I am not suggesting this as a method of dealing with the difficult people that you might have in your life. But as an example, let's just think about how we might be able to expand those common experiences that we have with each other to be able to allow us to be able to have more shared experience. If we have more shared experience, we have better understanding. I'll go back to Fisher and Uri. Fisher and Uri also had this wonderful quote: "Showing that you understand is the cheapest concession that you can make." Showing that you understand is the cheapest concession that you make. Here is one skill that many people have not been able to master. They have not been able to master the skill of being able to acknowledge something without agreeing with it. Customer service staff fall into this trap all the time. The customer rings to complain. The customer is upset. The person on the end of the phone representing the organisation believes that if I acknowledge the fact that you are upset, I am somehow accepting responsibility for the fact that you are upset. And so they go into denial. Has anyone ever been on the end of the phone when you've had a conversation like this? You're upset. You're talking to them. They're not recognising the fact that you're upset. What do? You just ramp it up, don't you? You just keep getting more upset until they get it. Or you demand that it be escalated because they don't get it, so let me talk to somebody who does. You need to be able to master the skill of acknowledging the fact that you feel really upset about this. I can understand that you're upset about this. I can understand that you feel disempowered by this. We need to be able to show that we understand, because if we can show that we understand, then there's empathy there. If you can believe that I understand you, then I come out with an opinion which varies from your opinion, you're more prepared to listen to me. Here's something that was really interesting I discovered many years ago. And here's the general belief that we've all had, is that attitude drives behaviour. And I'm sure you've all heard that saying, you hire staff for attitude. You can skill them up, but you hire them for attitude. Because if you've got the right attitude, then that attitude will determine their behaviour, And if that attitude then determines their behaviour, that behaviour will then define the work environment. The work environment will then define how successful that work is actually done. And then there's a lot of people, and particularly with the global financial crisis, they got into situations where they actually had staff who had the wrong attitude, but they had the skills and they didn't want them going off and working for the competition. And here's what we found. They found that you can actually switch those arrows around. You change someone's behaviour, you can actually change their attitude. See how brave you are. Everyone take one of the pencils. One of the Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre pencils. And you can do it here in this room if you want to, but if you don't feel brave enough, do it somewhere else. Take it and do this. Now, I see there's not a lot of you prepared to do that. I understand you might want to take this pencil home and sterilise it before you do that. That's fine. Or do it with your toothbrush when you're sitting in your hotel room. They have shown that if you force yourself to smile for 30 seconds, and by doing that you actually force yourself to smile, you actually make yourself feel better. The body does not know the difference between a real smile and an artificial smile. The whole Madan Katandra and that whole theory of laughter yoga is based on the principle that the body does not understand the difference between real laughter and artificially generated laughter. The endorphins start flowing anyhow. So, here's a little way that you can prove it to yourself. Next time that you have arrived at your office and you have had a really bad morning already, force yourself for the first 30 minutes to smile at everyone that you see. I guarantee at the end of that 30 minutes, you will feel better. And this is simply proving the fact that by changing our behaviour, we can actually change our attitude. I say this to people when I'm dealing with teaching people how to become involved in networking functions. And we all need to be able to network better, don't we? Yes. And most of us hate going to networking functions, don't we? It's about as popular an entry in our diary as a trip to the dentist. And here's what I do when I go to a networking function. And I walk in there, generally on my own, feeling as lonely as all the rest of you do, feeling that I'm going to be the only person left there with no one talking to them. I walk into a networking function now and pretend like it's my function. I walk up to people, thanks for coming, it's good to see you here. By the way, do you know where the food is? Oh, it's great that you can make the effort. I think it's going to be so much better that you come along here today. I actually act like the host. By forcing a change in behaviour, within half an hour, I'm glad that I turned up. Otherwise, I'm going home with a whole bunch of business cards and wishing that I'd stayed home and watched television that night. So how can you change the behaviour? But most of all, here's another interesting thing. By changing the environment, we can change the behaviour. And sometimes we create the most unfriendly environments for effective communication. Many years ago, I was asked to work with a large organisation, large manufacturing organisation. They had a very, very large factory. Typical of most factories, down on the ground floor was where all of the manufacturing went on, and on the floor above was where the offices were. And many times a day, somebody in management would need to talk to somebody from the factory floor. And they would send a message down, could you please come up to my office? And I questioned them. I said, why do you always ask them to come up to your office? I said, can I guess that maybe it's because it's just quiet up there, and this is quite a noisy manufacturing process, and it's too noisy to have that conversation down there on the factory floor. They said, yes, that's right. I said, and can I guess the fact that maybe only a tiny percentage of the time that you ask people to come up to your office, it's for the fact that you want to discipline them for doing something wrong? They said, yes, that's right. I said, are you aware of the fact that when I've been down there on the factory floor talking to your workers, they actually have a name for when somebody receives that summons to actually come up to the office? They said, oh, really? I said, yes, they do. I said, there's probably not a name that you're going to be terribly enamoured with. They said, what do they call it? I said, whenever somebody gets the message to come up to the manager's office, they call it the walk of death. I said, now, and the minute that somebody gets that summons, All along, people are actually waving to them, making funny little jokes. Might see you tomorrow, might not see you tomorrow. Constantly trawling through their mind, thinking, when was the last time I had a discussion with a manager, and what could I have possibly done wrong since I had that last discussion? I said, do you realise what attitude you're putting people in when they come into that room, when all you want to do is have a meaningful discussion with them? How were we able to solve the problem? By finding a quiet, neutral area where they could have those discussions. We did away with the walk of death. We actually improved the level of communication so much better. Their industrial relations improved because the communication was better, because there was less an adversarial approach. All we had to do was get rid of the walk of death. What could you do with the conversations that you're having with difficult people by maybe moving those conversations to a different environment? Maybe have it in the environment that they see as their power base. Maybe having it in a neutral environment. If you're having a difficult relationship, think about how you might be able to change that environment and see if that actually changes the behaviour, changes the relationship. I worked for 17 years as a volunteer telephone counsellor in Australia's largest relationship counselling service. Why did I do that? I initially did it because it was the only way that I could learn how to improve my listening skills. And I would suggest one way in which you can instantly improve your communication skills is to improve your listening skills. Here's some scary facts. 48% of our waking communicating time is spent listening. We spend as much time listening as we do with the other three methods: writing, reading, and speaking. But think about it. We all got taught to write, didn't we? We all got taught to read. We all got taught to speak. I think it's quite unusual. I have young children. Somebody said to me the other day, isn't it amazing? We spend the first 2 years with our children trying to teach them to walk and speak. And then once they reach 3, we spend most of our time telling them to sit down and shut up. But we all got taught with all of these other methodologies. I could guarantee that there's probably no person in this room who has ever done any formal training on listening. And why did I end up as a telephone counsellor volunteering? Because they told me, when I investigated what was available in my local area, that was the main area where I could learn to be able to be a better listener. You want to improve your communication skills, you want to improve your relationships, become a better listener. Have a 10-minute conversation with somebody else, get them talking for 8 minutes of those 10 minutes, and they will end up believing you're the most brilliant conversationalist they've ever met. That's not the point of why I mentioned that. 48% of the calls that used to come in to that particular telephone counselling service were about relationship problems. And almost without exception, the standard line that people said was, if you can just tell me what to do to get that person to change, then my life will be better. And guess what my response to them every time was? We have no control over that person. You have no control over that person. I have no control over that person. What are you going to do in your life if they don't change? It's a false hope. And so there are so many times when we believe that if I could just get that person to change, then our relationship is going to be better. Here's my message to you. They're probably not going to change. So if they're not going to change, what are you going to do with that? Does that mean that you need to change? Does that mean that you need to change to the way that you actually deal with them? Does that mean that you need to just minimise your interactions with them? Or do you need to treat them differently? Maybe even treat them the way that they don't expect. Dr. Edward de Bono gave us the wonderful principle of the pattern interrupters. Edward de Bono, creator of the principle of lateral thinking, actually his quotes were actually up there on the audio visual. It was part of the opening ceremony. And what Edward de Bono said, and I'm sure you'll all be aware of this, is that we tend to think in patterns. We need to think in patterns. Because if we don't think in patterns, then we're not efficient. The danger is that when people see us and interact with us, they tend to think in patterns. They might see you, see the way that you talk, and think about the last interaction they had with someone who spoke like that. They might see the way that you look and think about the last time that they had an interaction with someone who looked that way. They might see your title and think about last time that they had an interaction with someone with that title. And then they're going to treat you based on the assumption that you're going to act exactly the same way as that other person did. You need to interrupt that pattern. You need to let them know that you're different. You need to do something that they don't expect. And here's a little pattern interrupter I'll share with you, one that I use now. I use it constantly in my life. And it's to do with that principle of trust that I mentioned before. You see, I used to wait for people to earn my trust. And once people earned my trust, I would give that trust, and we would have a trust interaction. The trust cycle was working. But I also recognise the fact that there are many, many people that didn't get to earn my trust who were probably quite trustworthy. And so what I do now is I find it's much better if I save time by starting the trust cycle. So when I first have an interaction with someone nowadays, I will probably give them some piece of information that they don't expect me to give them. Now, I'm not naive about this. It will be a tiny piece of information, something they're not expecting, and if they violate the trust and share that information in inappropriate areas, it's not going to in any way hurt me. It serves two purposes. Number one, it's starting the trust cycle and acting as a pattern interrupter. And number two, it's acting as a little trust test for me to be able to see if this other person really is trustworthy. How might you be able to use a pattern interrupter to be able to make people realise that you are different, that you're not the same as the last accountant that they dealt with, you're not the same as the last manager that they dealt with, you're not the same as the last person in your particular role that they dealt with. You are different, you are an individual, it's an individual and unique relationship, and you need to be able to find ways in which you can be able to identify that. And so when you're having an interaction, particularly if somebody that's being difficult with you, you try the pattern interrupter. Try the principle of labelling. Labelling is the principle of putting a positive label on someone and then watching them try to live up to that label. I did a lot with schools. I found there was actually a way to get teenage boys to do things for me. Want a teenage boy to empty that rubbish bin? One person would say, empty that rubbish bin, otherwise I'm going to tell your teacher on you. What do? I go up and say, I need someone who looks responsible. You look like somebody I can rely on. Could you please take care of simply emptying that bin for me? And all of a sudden they've got the label reliable, they want to live up to that label, they do it for me. How can you label your clients? How could you label someone as innovative based on their iPhone 5 that they've got in their hand or some business practice that they've taken? So then they're more likely to want to live up to that label of being innovative when you present to them maybe an innovative way of being able to arrange their finances. If you want to be able to motivate people, there's two kinds of motivators. There's the extrinsic motivators, the rewards that we offer people, maybe even chocolates to people in the front row. And then there's the most valuable motivators, which are the intrinsic motivators. And if you want to see the best work that's ever done on this, go to the work done by a gentleman by the name of Daniel Pink. Wrote a brilliant book about 4 years ago called Drive, which looks at the difference between intrinsic motivators and extrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators, the bonuses, the rewards, the titles, which are very good at motivating people when they're doing menial tasks. But when you want to motivate people to be creative, when you want to motivate people to look for solutions, when you want to motivate people to actually start looking at the periphery where the real solutions are, then the three things that are going to make them do that are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, very, very important. For the Gen Ys in the room, or most importantly, for those of you like me who have to deal with Gen Ys. And guess what? I've discovered Gen Ys of all ages. Got nothing to do with when they were born. It's got to do with an attitude. Autonomy. How can you give them more control over things that aren't all that important to you? This is what I want to achieve, but how you achieve it can be more up to you. I will give you more autonomy about that. I will let you have more control over that, because that is a greater motivator. Mastery. We all desire to be great at something. How can you get to know this difficult person you're dealing with, maybe this person who's working for you, about what they want to be really good at? And how can you help them to really master that? And it will probably not just be a skill that's only tied up with one narrow profession. It will probably be a life skill. How can you identify what life skill they want to become masterful at, and how can you give them roles that are going to allow them to be able to achieve that? And purpose. And again, I'm going to give you another name. Want some good reading? Simon Sinek. S-I-N-E-K, wrote a brilliant book called Selling the Why. Don't sell the what, don't sell the how, sell the why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When it comes to purpose, every one of us has an inherent desire to be part of something greater than ourselves. What does this difficult person that you're dealing with want to be part of? How well can you know them? I was talking to a group many, many years ago, and I actually said to them, you know, I've become aware of the fact, and this is the trigger that actually created that wheel, the tool of connection that I mentioned right at the very start. How well do you know your staff? How much effort do you put into your best staff compared to your best client? Why do your best staff come to work every day? What is their purpose? What do they want to be masterful at? Because if you don't know why your best staff come to work every day, one day they won't turn up and you won't know why. When we start talking about dealing with difficult people, one of the things that often gets mentioned is the golden rule. We've all heard of the golden rule, haven't we? Which is treat people the way you'd like people to treat you. And I'm sure you're all aware of all of the psychometric testing systems that are out there. Here's the model of two of the most popular ones. Top left-hand corner is the Myers-Briggs MBTI, personality typing. That one there is the William Marston DISC behavioural styles. Now, whether you use these ones or other ones, the basic principle behind these is that people are different. And the smallest number of different categories I've seen is 4. So what does this mean? This means that if you stick to just treating people the way you want to be treated, you're going to annoy 3/4 of the people that you meet. Because they don't want to be treated the way you want to be treated. They want to be treated the way they want to be treated. Dr. Tony D'Alessandro, about 4 years ago, gave us the platinum rule, which supersedes the golden rule. Don't treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Treat people the way they'd like to be treated. I have these discussions all the time. Only 2 days ago, my wife actually said to me, Kevin, why did you say that? I would never have said anything like that. And I turned to her and I said, yes, darling, that's why I married you. Because you wouldn't say the things that I say. And when you look at these models, up here, they have also found that when we choose a life partner, you will generally find that your life partner comes from one of the different categories to where you come. Because whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously, we are seeking in a life partner that person which fills the gaps that we know that we have. So, main message, don't try and treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Treat people the way they'd like to be treated. And get to understand the way that they'd like to receive their information. We also need to be process smart. We need to understand the dynamics of the situation. What's the type of conflict that we have? 3 types of conflict. Number 1, a substantive conflict. We have a basic disagreement about what the problem is. Because if we have a perceptual problem, then we should make the effort to really understand the other person's perception. Because the other person will have a perception which will be just as valid as ours and will allow us to be able to get a better view of actually what's going on. We need to see things from all angles, not just from the one particular point of view. And I want to draw on the great Dr. Stephen Covey, who again, unfortunately, passed away in the last 12 months, who gave us the 7 habits of highly effective people. And one of his 7 habits was, first, seek to understand, then be understood. First, seek to understand, then be understood. Maintain your authority. The number of times when I've become involved, maybe even almost as a mediator, in discussions between people who are having arguments, and one of them has simply failed the emotional intelligence test. They have started falling into name calling. They have started going into making statements of hyperbole, statements of grand, broad statements which cannot be justified. If you're going to have a discussion about that, make sure that you don't ever start name calling. Name their behaviour, don't name the person. Describe the behaviour, describe the action. Don't give the person's names. That will diminish your authority, it will diminish your confidence, and it will give you less leverage in that particular difficult discussion. Don't ever argue with their reasons. Their reasons are their reasons. You can't tell them that your reasons for believing something are wrong. The same as if I attack your ideas head on. You have an idea, of a fundamental belief that you've had all of your life. I come along and say, that's wrong. Is your first thought going to be, oh gosh, that Kevin seems like an older and wiser person. He must be more intelligent than me. I will change my life systems. I will change my life belief. Yes, the fact that he said it is wrong is going to cause me to change my mind. That's not going to work. If I come up to you and challenge your ideas head on, what do? You dig deeper to be able to find more reasons why I'm wrong. In attacking your ideas head on, I actually entrench you more deeply into the position where you are at the moment. You don't have to prove them wrong. You just have to prove yourself right. Be the master of the process. Sometimes you need to be proactive. Sometimes you need to be proactive. They will taunt you. They will recognise what your hot buttons are, and they will do everything they can to push them. Be aware of the power of silence. Somebody says something to you, something confrontational, something quite challenging, something taunting you, hoping that they're going to get a reaction from you which will put them on the front foot, put them in the leading position. Best thing you can do, shut up. Simply look back at them. The power of silence. I'm sure if you think back into the days when you were maybe a junior employee and you got called into the manager's office and you sat in that little chair and the manager sat in his or her big chair behind the desk and they asked you a question and you gave what you thought was a totally satisfactory answer to that question, and then they just sat there and looked at you. And the silence expanded. And you felt the pressure, didn't you? And eventually you said something else. And the minute those words left your lips, you realised that you shouldn't have said that to your manager in that particular environment. The power of silence. You don't have to react. It's up to you. Reaction is an option. If you're going to have an agreement with someone or a disagreement with someone, please always allow them a dignified exit. Never burn your bridges. Recognise the fact that the success of any discussion is allowing both parties to make a dignified exit from that discussion. Even if you've been able to browbeat them, prove them entirely wrong, don't push it. Make sure that you've been able to maintain that relationship, because the relationship is going to be valuable to you in the future. Don't burn your bridges. And the final smart is being self-smart. Understanding ourselves, understanding how we can become smarter in the way that we deal with other people. First point, keep your perspective. Don't confuse satisfying with smart. And this is the reaction to the taunts I referred to before. Somebody will say something to you and your gut reaction will be, I'm going to make them pay for that. How dare they say something like that? That was really insulting. I'm going to make sure that I give an insult back to be able to even things up. Don't confuse what's satisfying with what's smart. What's the smart thing for you to say at the moment? Not what's the satisfying thing for you to say at the moment. I've had clients ring me and say, that person has upset me so much. And I've done it in an email. And I said, and I just want to shoot a reply back to them. And you all know that that is the dumbest thing you can do, don't you? Sending a reply when you're emotional, and worse still, sending it in writing so it's going to live there forever. They'll probably CC somebody else on it and then send the trail on so everyone else can see it as well. Don't do that. Last time somebody called me and said they had a problem like that, I said, call a counselling service. I can do that now because I don't work there anymore. I said, vent there. Make yourself feel satisfied by doing that. Don't do it with that person. That is not the smart thing to do. That will not help the relationship. That will not allow you to be able to move forward. Don't get caught in revenge mode. Don't get caught in discussions which are therapy. Keep that for elsewhere. When you're having a disagreement with someone, the Thomas Kilmann conflict model I think might be useful. And you've got two axes on this. Number one, this axis up here, which is on assertiveness or self-interest, or how much you actually want to achieve the task. And along here is your cooperativeness or others' interests. So if you have low interest in either, you'll just avoid the conversation and probably not even answer the calls or respond to the emails. If you are really interested in your own interests but don't care about the others, you will fall into competing mode. If you are really interested in maintaining the relationship, but you are, in fact, that is more important to you than maybe the outcome or even your own interests, you'll fall into accommodating mode. If you are trying to reach a balance with all of these, you'll go into compromising, and if you are trying to be able to get the best out of this particular environment, you'll go into collaboration. Here's my question for you. Based on a model like that, where is your default position? Do you tend to fall into competing mode? Do you tend to fall into accommodating mode? Does it vary? There will be times when the outcome is more important than the relationship. There will be other times when the relationship is more important than the outcome. When that is, you will go into different parts of that graph. You need to do it consciously. You need to be able to do it in a way that's going to allow you to be able to move forward. And as I said, being emotionally smart, please recognise the fact that you don't have to like them. There are many people that I deal with and have very, very successful business relationships with. But they've never been to my home, and I'll never go to theirs. They don't get birthday cards from me. They don't even know when my birthday is. That's fine. I don't have to like them to be able to get along. And here's the other nice balancing fact. They don't have to like you either. there have been times when I've said to people, I get it. You don't like me. I'm okay with that. Now, do you want to do business or not? One of my mentors actually said to me, he said, well, I was so pleased when I went through the latest psychometric testing, because he said it showed that I have a fundamental lack of any desire to be liked by anybody else. I said, well, it's probably lucky that you're in law, but that's another matter altogether. But the great thing about that is that when he has business relationships, he's not concerned about, they have to like me for it to work. They don't have to. There are many, many wonderful symbiotic relationships in life, in nature, which have nothing to do with people liking each other. Here's a good example. That's the rhino. That's the oxpecker. Oxpecker lives by clearing the nits off the rhino's hide. The rhino and the oxpecker don't know each other. They don't have a relationship at all, but they have a perfectly satisfactory business relationship. Maybe some people in your lives are like oxpeckers. Can you identify the pattern? If you're having a difficult relationship with somebody else, is it simply the fact that they have difficult relationships with everybody? Or is the pattern problem with you? I can remember one particular meeting that I had with this client that I was dealing with. He was a very, very large man. And I can remember at one stage, I was sitting on one side of the desk, he was sitting on the other side of the desk. He rose up to his full 6'5" height, very, very large. And the primary thought in my mind was, can I turn around, get out of my chair and get out the door before he reaches across the table and hits me? I got out the door relatively quickly. We had an ongoing relationship because I discovered later on that that was just the way that he dealt with everybody. He was big, he was a bully, and that was just his way of trying to intimidate people. And I realised that once I was able to call his bluff, sit on the other side of the table and say, just sit down, I'm not going to be threatened by that sort of rubbish, all of a sudden we were able to move forward. But I could only do that because I'd spoken to other people who had dealt with him who said, he does that all the time. It wasn't you, it wasn't that situation, that is just his pattern of dealing. If you're going to be emotionally intelligent, you need to be able to recognise the fact that anger is a secondary emotion. Anytime you get angry, anytime somebody else gets angry with you, recognise the fact anger is a secondary emotion. The primary emotion is fear. Anytime you're getting angry, think to yourself, what am I afraid of? And generally, it's a fear of losing something. Robert Cialdini found that the fear of losing something that we already have is a much stronger incentive than the promise of getting something new. If somebody else is getting angry, you might be brave enough to challenge them with it, or simply try and analyse it in your own mind. What are they afraid of? I can see the anger, but the anger is a secondary emotion. The primary emotion is fear. What are they afraid of? Patience. Some problems get fixed with time. Don't confuse urgent with important. Some things are urgent and unimportant. Some things are important and not urgent. And many times when people try to manipulate you, they will do it by trying to force you to do things faster than you want to. Trying to create artificial deadlines. Trying to make you make a decision when you don't really have to make a decision. And I was very, very lucky many, many years ago when I was in a board meeting on a particular organisation I was on the board of. The chairman was my mentor, and we were getting a lot of pressure to make a decision. He simply adjourned the meeting. I said to him afterwards, what's that all about, Ed? And he said, Kevin, you've got to realise, in business, most things are never as urgent as people make them out to be. Some things are urgent, but be aware of the fact that a lot of urgency is just a manipulation ploy put on by people. So we need to be able to be aware of that. We need to recognise the fact, and I heard this wonderful, even though I apologise, it's not a terribly pleasant image to leave you with this time of the afternoon, but I was listening to an interview with former President Bill Clinton about 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about the problems in the Middle East. And he was saying some problems are like a scab and some problems are like an abscess. And I've struggled to be able to find nicer analogies than this, but nothing works quite so well. But what he's saying, because with a scab, the best thing you can do is just leave it. The body will take care of itself. If you keep picking at it, it's just going to make it worse. Just leave it and it will heal itself. Other things like an abscess, if you leave it, it's going to toxify your body and you're going to end up in really big problems. So some problems require action. Some will fix themselves if time is just left to take its normal course. The intelligent person, the analytical person, is the one who can recognise what problems need my action now, what problems can I simply allow a little bit of time to see if it's going to solve the problem anyhow for me. And if you need to be proactive in the times when you do need to take action, do it sooner. There's been a couple of times in my life, more than I would like to think about, when I've needed to sack people. I've needed to terminate employees. And it's always been too late. Anytime you have to sack someone, it's always too late. If you need to make an action, do it sooner rather than later. And here's something I want to leave you with. Will people be able to get these slides as a download?
They would. We'll definitely upload it into the website, conference website.
Okay, it's going to go on the conference website because I want to share with you, just to finish up here, some wonderful little phrases that I've found that have been very, very useful whenever we get involved in conversations with difficult people. Here's some of the phrases that I have found most useful. Number one, do you realise that when you say that, the effect it has is? Just a statement that allows me to be able to separate out the behaviour from the person. I can then name the behaviour and I can talk about the effect that behaviour has, but I am not in any way impacted or not in any way tempted to start name-calling or making assumptions. So do you realise that when you say that, the effect it has on me is just turning me off everything that you've got to say? Recognise that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me the most important for you is this. Is that the case or not? Two wonderful little hints in that particular phrase. First of all, you start out with correct me if I'm wrong. That allows you to be able to say much more confrontational information. That allows you to be able to follow it with something which is a lot more challenging than anything else, because you're giving them the opportunity to be able to correct you if what you're saying is not right. It seems to me the most important thing for you is, so we're trying to identify what their priorities are, identify when somebody is maybe working on a hidden agenda with us, and is that the case or not? Never underestimate the power of those two little words. As an Australian, I resent that it was about a decade ago, George W. Bush went to the world and said, this is a war on terrorism. You're either with us or you're against us. And he forced naive countries like Australia, and I'll own that here in front of this audience, to believe that we had to make a choice. And we made the wrong choice. That's why we've got troops in parts of the world where they shouldn't be at the moment. Because he said, you're either here or you're there. And there are other smart countries that say, no, I'm sorry, George, we don't have to take your choices. There's a third option. And it's the same achieved with or not. Is that important to you? They can ignore that question. They can be vague. Is that important to you or not? All of a sudden they've got to answer it. All of a sudden they've got to respond. You know, that sounded really aggressive. Was that your intention? You know, that sounded really insulting. Was that your intention? I have used that so many times, and it has been a beautiful reality check to the other person. Half the time, they didn't realise. The other half the time, they did realise, and it just let them know that I was not prepared to accept that sort of behaviour. that sounded really aggressive. Was that your intention? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm just so passionate about it. But no, I didn't mean it to sound aggressive. And all of a sudden, the conversation is back on the track where it should be. Help me understand how this is moving us forward in this discussion. When they start becoming aggressive, when they start coming out with negative statements, help me understand how this is moving us forward. And again, the magic of those 3 words, help me understand. Help me understand how you think this could be useful. Help me understand how you think that would be of interest to me. Help me understand how you think that's fair. Help me understand how you came up with that figure. Very, very powerful phrase. In the past, I've avoided some issues because of their potential for conflict. Now I realise that was a big mistake because it created big problems later on for everyone, and I don't want to do that to you. This is an area I'm working on, and I'm hoping to get better at it. So I hope this comes across constructively, and then you dump it on them. Now that's quite complex, but it's really coming out of the wonderful work in fierce conversations. And again, if you want to know how to really deal with the difficult conversations, get hold of that wonderful book called Fierce Conversations. And I apologise, it's Susan, I can't remember her surname, but do a Google search on Fierce Conversations and you'll see that wonderful material there about how you can come up with even more phrases like this. I'm confused. Earlier you said this, but now you're saying that. Do you see why I'm having trouble understanding you? Wonderful way of being able to challenge inconsistencies. Wonderful way of being able to challenge the fact that they say this but they do that. Wonderful way of being able to put names or at least articulate passive-aggressive behaviour. I'm confused. You do this and then you do that. You say this and then you do this. You say this and then you say that. Help me understand how those 2 factors fit together. Can you see why I'm having trouble understanding you? Just point out the inconsistencies. Challenge them with it. William Ury, part of that team, Fisher and Ury, wrote another wonderful book called The Power of a Positive No 3 years ago, and he gave us this great phrase. It's great what we've achieved so far, but if you expect me to change my mind on that point, you are mistaken. However, if you can accept that, I could look at being more flexible in this area. In other words, it's a 3-step process. First step, acknowledge what we've achieved so far. Number 2, give the definite no. This is an area on which I cannot move. This is an area where the no is unequivocal. But if you can accept that, then there is something else where I could be more flexible. In other words, you redirect them to an area where you could have a more profitable conversation. And then finally, and what else? Somebody's calling you, somebody's complaining, somebody's telling you about problems they're having. Rather than trying to defend yourself, sit there, listen to it, and then say to them, and what else? Give them a chance to be able to put everything on the table. Don't try and start that conversation or that difficult conversation without being aware of what all the facts are. And so what I've tried to do today is be able to show you how you could be more people smart, more process smart, more self-smart in being able to deal with difficult people that you have to deal with, manage difficult people. I have about 5 minutes to go. We might have about 5 minutes if there's any questions from the audience.
We can take questions now. Please do use this opportunity to ask Kevin any questions. You're okay with that, right, Kevin?
Yes.
Any questions?
Any questions at all?
Will personal relationship questions be okay with you?
Thank you. Oh, I thought I was the one producing the humour in the room, but it's fantastic. We've got a double act going on there.
Any questions? All right, go ahead.
Yes,
ma'am.
please.
Can you please approach the mic? If you're not shy, you can introduce your name.
Please use the mic, yes. And
yeah, Kevin has
and
something.
how brave
for
am
you.
I? Before I even hear the question, I'm going to give you a reward for asking it.
No thanks, I don't like chocolate. Sorry. I'm not difficult at all, but it's not my preference. I hope you understand.
What's your question?
Sorry, Kevin.
It's okay.
Okay, I'm Casey. My question is, Sometimes we think people are difficult, but we forget that the situation is the other way around.
Yes. That's not a question, that's a wonderful statement, which deserves a reward, but you rejected it, that's fine. I believe that I'm highly qualified to be able to talk about this topic because I'm the most difficult person that I know. And the internal arguments that I have with myself are probably the most difficult discussions that I have. But thank you for mentioning that point, that if other people are seeing you as being difficult, if you're seeing other people as being difficult, recognise the fact that they are probably seeing you as being doubly difficult. I'm an optimist about this. I believe that there are no such things as difficult people. There are just difficult relationships. And we need to be able to find more common ground. And my suggestion there is you probably don't know them well enough. Keep digging deeper until you can find a point of common ground. Keep digging deeper until you can find the overlap in purpose. Once you've found the common ground and the overlap in purpose, then all of a sudden you've got a connection there, and I would suggest you'll be able to find a way to move forward.
We can accept one more question.
One more question?
Yeah, the gentleman there. Go ahead, sir. Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Farhad Hussain.
Do you like chocolate?
Thank you. I'm similar to her. I do not take chocolates either. Sorry. Sorry, yes.
I'll bring fruit next time.
No, I represent the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Bangladesh. My name is Farhad Hussain. What I want to know, when I find somebody difficult, I find somebody, with whom I cannot really resolve the conflict, are there always solutions to that? Sometimes I believe that there's no solution. Do you agree or disagree with me?
I like you, I'm an optimist. I believe there's always a solution. I believe that if we can't find the solution, it is simply a fundamental lack of creativity. Now, sometimes the solution might need a third party. That's the only comment that I'll throw into that one.
Okay,
but I would suggest that if we go in with the attitude that there is a solution possible here, then we're most likely to find it. Otherwise, we are just putting ourselves into victim mentality.
Yeah, because what I do at times, because when I find something that it's very difficult, so difficult which is beyond my expertise, knowledge to resolve, I avoid it and just quit.
Mm-hmm. And my suggestion in that time, as you said, there's a gap there. Maybe you need to find someone else who can fill those gaps and get them involved in that interaction as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, just one last question. Oh, all right.
Oh, you just want a chocolate? Okay. Where did I put them?
Can you please introduce yourself? You can give the other two to me.
I'll have both the chocolates.
Oh.
Better be a good question.
Actually, my name's Lily. I just want to ask, do you see a trend that men are, is it gender biased? Do you find women more difficult to manage than men?
If men and women understood the way that we communicate better, then I think most of the problems would go away. I think nature has caused us to complement each other beautifully in the way that we communicate. But the way that women tell stories and the way that men tell facts, you know what I mean? Here's a little hint. If you are speaking, regardless of gender, if you're speaking to a woman, show emotion on your face, because women are always looking for emotional connection. Okay? If you're talking to a man, show less emotion on your face. It just confuses us. We think you're not paying attention. So I think it needs to be an understanding of the fact that we are complementary communication styles, not the same communication styles. But certainly, if most men could learn to listen like a woman, and most women could learn to articulate facts like a man, then generally we would be better communicators.
I believe we have just one more question for the woman.
One more
Yeah,
question?
go ahead, ma'am. Just approach the mic and introduce your name, please.
Oh, take the chocolate first. I know, time's getting by on us, I understand. They're getting staler as I speak.
My name is Suyin. Kevin, reading a lot of books, listening to this, using the right words, most of the time when you are having a conversation, difficult conversation, people tend to get emotional, especially the women generally. How do you, at that point of time, control yourself or the conversation? Because when people get emotional, you can't remember any of this.
Yes. Yes. And if you're becoming emotional in a situation like that, sometimes it's better to make another appointment and continue the conversation at another time. Well, you will not be able to be assertive with the tears rolling down your face. For males, you will not be able to be engaging if they can see the whites of your knuckles because you're so tense with the situation. Prepare yourself for it. Be prepared for them to push your emotional buttons. Recognise the fact that they can see your hot buttons. They are screaming at them. And they're going to push them. Expect that to happen. And then if it does get to a situation where you're having trouble controlling it, before it gets to that stage, call an adjournment and agree to meet at some other time. Otherwise, it will not be good for either of you.
Okay, I believe that will be the last question. Thank you very much.
I just got 2
all
minutes
right.
to finish off with.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Am I allowed to do that? I've got 2 minutes.
Is 1 minute okay?
1
I'm
minute.
bargaining.
I've got a difficult MC. Just to wrap up for you. Some of the points I've covered today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih. All right, Kev, if you would like to have more chocolates from Kevin, he will be actually conducting a master class on 29th November titled Influence and Imagination, a Powerful Combination at the Royal Chulan Hotel. And you can learn about 2 different types of imagination, how you can apply them, and how to put images in their minds. It will last 8 times longer than in any words. So you can join Kevin there, right, on 29 November. So maybe just in the precision of the speaker, Kevin will receive a plant scientifically known as, okay, wait for it, Dryobalanops aromatica, right? But it's locally known as pokok kapur. Yes, that's how scientific it is. Consisting of frame, and the plant will in turn be planted in frames, campus, and stations across the country. And Kevin will receive a certificate of appreciation as shown there. And so let's give another round of applause for Kevin.
Good.
Please do not forget that we'll be screening a movie at the plenary hall at 5:30 p.m. titled Too Big to Fail. It's actually based on a non-fiction book titled Too Big to Fail by Andrew Ross Sorkin, and it chronicles the 2008 financial meltdown, focusing on the actions of Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Paulson, which happens to be the real case story, to contain the problems during the period of August 2008 to October 3rd, 2008. It's actually nominated for 11 nominations at the 63rd Primetime Emmy Awards, and Paul Giamatti's portrayal of Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Board of Governors of United States Federal Reserve System, earned him an award for outstanding performance by a main actor in a miniseries, courtesy brought to you especially by HBO. So please do join us at the plenary hall, 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. This is 98 minutes running time. And for those who love to have a chance to get a Barefoot Leadership book written by Alvin Ng, please do bring yourself to the registration counter at the hall next by, which if you register your interest to participate in the 2013 MI conference, you just might have a chance to win this book, okay? Thank you very much and see you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening.